He gave his hidden water to a giant alien girl. Next day, 300 warriors surrounded his ship. Captain Axel Barnes stared at the vast expanse of the desert planet, his eyes scanning the horizon. The winds howled, kicking up sand that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. He was alone, far from the safety of his ship, deep in the heart of an alien world that very few humans had ever set foot on. The planet, Zora 3, was known for its scorching heat and harsh environment, but there was something about it that drew Axel in. There were rumors of ancient secrets buried beneath the sand, relics from civilizations that had long since vanished. Axel, the explorer, was always on the hunt for the unknown. The ship had been grounded for repairs after a malfunction during their last mission, and Axel had decided to spend the time exploring. The desert, while barren on the surface, had a strange allure. His sensors had picked up an unusual energy reading several days ago, and now, with a bit of luck, he was standing near its source. Axel wiped the sweat from his brow as he trudged through the sand, feeling the heat of the sun beating down on him. His water reserves were running low, but he had learned the importance of perseverance during his years as a space explorer. He knew the desert well enough to understand that giving up now would mean certain death. His supplies weren't much, but he kept moving, knowing he would find shelter soon enough. Hours passed, and just when Axel was beginning to lose hope, he saw it, an oasis. His eyes widened in disbelief as the shimmering water appeared out of nowhere, as if the desert itself had opened up to him. The sight was almost too perfect, too surreal. It was as though he had stumbled into a secret world that had remained hidden for centuries. But what caught Axel's attention more than the water itself was the figure lying near the edge of the oasis. It was large, much larger than any human being he had ever seen. At first, he thought it might be a mirage, but as he drew closer, the figure became more distinct. A giant alien woman, her skin a deep shade of violet, was sprawled across the ground, clearly unconscious. Axel's heart raced as he approached her cautiously. The creature, though alien in appearance, looked fragile. Her long, silver hair, tangled with dirt and sand, framed her face like a halo. Her breathing was slow and labored, her chest rising and falling in an uneven rhythm. She appeared to be in pain. For a moment, Axel hesitated. He had never encountered anything like this before. The giant woman was clearly not human, but something inside him told him to help. He wasn't sure what it was: compassion, curiosity, or perhaps just a desire to make a difference in a world that had always seemed indifferent to him. Whatever the reason, Axel made up his mind. He opened the flap of his survival pack, pulling out the small water canister he had been saving. The water was precious, and he knew it could be the difference between life and death in the harsh desert. But he couldn't ignore the woman's suffering. Slowly, Axel knelt beside her and began to pour the water into his palm. He hesitated for a moment before gently offering it to her lips, his hand trembling. The alien's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep, glowing pupils that reflected the light of the twin suns. She blinked several times, disoriented, before her gaze locked onto Axel's face. He spoke softly, hoping his voice would reach her. "Drink, it'll help." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she reached out with one massive hand, her fingers closing around his wrist with surprising strength. Axel was startled by the power in her grip, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he held the water up to her lips again, and this time she drank deeply, her throat moving as she swallowed the precious liquid. The moment she finished, she pulled back, her large eyes scanning Axel's face, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She seemed confused, perhaps unsure of who he was or why he was helping her. Axel gave her a reassuring smile, though he knew she probably didn't understand his intentions. "You're safe now," he said gently, even though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. He wasn't even sure what kind of language she spoke. Still, Axel felt a connection, something unspoken that passed between them as she looked at him. The alien woman's gaze softened as she relaxed slightly. Her chest rose and fell more steadily now, as though the water had revived her. She leaned back against the sand, her massive body stretching out with a soft groan. Axel couldn't help but marvel at her size. She must have been at least 12 feet tall, her proportions inhumanly large compared to his own. But there was a beauty in her, something serene despite the harshness of the desert. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the water do its work before finally speaking. Her voice was deep, resonant, and strange, a series of melodic sounds that Axel could barely comprehend. But the tone was unmistakable, gratitude. Axel didn't know what to say. He had no idea what kind of alien she was or what she wanted, but he couldn't leave her there to die. His own need for survival had taken precedence until now, but helping her felt like the right thing to do. As the minutes passed, the giant woman seemed to regain some strength, though she remained seated on the ground, her eyes watching Axel closely. She still hadn't said anything, but her gaze held a quiet intensity, as if she were trying to figure him out. Axel stood up slowly, offering his hand to help her, but she ignored it, instead rising to her feet on her own. The alien's movement was graceful despite her size. She towered over him, her head nearly brushing the edge of the sky as she stood fully upright. Axel couldn't help but stare in awe at the sheer scale of her. She was a giant compared to him, but somehow there was something familiar in the way she moved. She wasn't entirely unlike a human, just much, much larger. Without warning, she bent down to examine him more closely, her face coming so close that Axel could feel her warm breath on his skin. Her large eyes blinked as she studied him, her expression shifting from curiosity to something else. Axel stepped back slightly, feeling the weight of her gaze. There was something powerful about her, something beyond mere physical strength. She was not just a giant, she was a force in her own right. And as she stood there, towering over him, Axel couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was only the beginning of something much larger. There was more to her than just a mysterious alien stranded in the desert. And there was more to Axel's role in this encounter than he could ever have imagined. Axel stood there, staring up at the giant alien woman who now stood tall before him, her immense presence impossible to ignore. Her skin shimmered in the desert light, a beautiful violet hue that seemed to glow under the twin suns. Her long silver hair cascaded around her shoulders, moving with a gentle breeze that blew across the sand. Her eyes, large and bright, studied Axel with an intensity that made him feel both small and strangely important at the same time. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. He had just given her the last of his water, something that could have been the difference between life and death for him. Yet, instead of attacking or turning away, she seemed to be assessing him, taking in every detail with an almost curious expression. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was deep, almost like a rumbling echo, but it carried an air of authority. The words were not in any language Axel recognized, but there was a rhythm to them, a smooth cadence that made him believe she was trying to communicate something important. Axel took a step back, trying to think of how he could respond. He wasn't sure if she was asking a question, giving a command, or just speaking to herself. Whatever it was, it seemed clear that she wasn't hostile, at least not yet. He slowly raised his hands, palms facing her, to show that he meant no harm. He wasn't sure if she understood, but he needed to try. I don't understand," Axel said slowly, his voice almost drowned out by the wind. He wasn't sure if the words would reach her, but he hoped she would understand the tone. He wasn't a threat. The giant alien woman tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a long moment before she reached out with one of her massive hands. Axel froze, unsure of what to expect, but the touch was surprisingly gentle. She placed her hand near his chest, just above where his heart beat. The warmth of her touch was calming, and he felt an odd sense of connection. The giant woman lowered her hand after a few moments, and Axel noticed that her gaze had softened. She took a step back, her feet sinking slightly into the sand, and she seemed to consider him carefully. The silence stretched on, and Axel realized that there was nothing he could do except wait. He didn't have answers for her, and he wasn't sure what she wanted. Then, without warning, she turned away from him, walking toward the oasis. Axel watched as she moved, her long legs carrying her effortlessly across the sand. She knelt by the water's edge and dipped her hands into the cool liquid, drinking deeply as if she had not tasted anything in days. The sight was mesmerizing, the way she consumed the water with such need and power. Axel felt a pang of guilt in his chest as he realized that he had given her his last water supply. He had been selfish, giving it to her without thinking of his own needs, but at the same time, he couldn't regret it. He had seen the way she had struggled before, the way she had looked at him with gratitude after drinking, and he knew that he had done the right thing. After drinking her fill, the alien woman stood again, her massive form towering over Axel. She looked at him, her deep violet eyes locking onto his, and for the first time, Axel could see a hint of emotion in them, a flicker of something that wasn't just curiosity. It was something more, something deeper. Without speaking, the woman made a slow gesture with her hand, as if beckoning him to follow her. Axel hesitated, unsure of what this new development meant. But the woman didn't wait for him. She turned, moving with purpose toward the distant horizon. Her long stride covered the ground quickly, and Axel was left with no choice but to follow. He didn't know why, but something in his gut told him that this was important. Something was unfolding here, something that went far beyond a simple act of kindness. The alien woman had shared a moment with him, and he couldn't ignore it. Axel jogged to catch up with her, keeping his distance but staying close enough to follow her lead. They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, the desert stretching out endlessly before them. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the landscape in a soft orange light. The wind had picked up again, but the temperature had started to drop, a welcome relief after the heat of the day. Eventually, the alien woman stopped in front of what appeared to be a large rock formation. Axel was surprised. He hadn't noticed anything of interest in this part of the desert. The rocks stood in a circular arrangement, creating a kind of natural barrier, and in the center was a large stone altar-like structure. The woman approached the stone structure and placed her hand on it, running her fingers across the surface as if tracing an ancient pattern. Axel watched from a distance, unsure of what to do. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to approach or just stay back. But the woman turned to face him again, her eyes locking onto his once more. She gestured for him to come closer. Cautiously, Axel stepped forward. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him as he walked toward the stone structure. When he reached her, she made another motion, indicating that he should touch the stone. Axel hesitated. There was something almost sacred about this place, something ancient, and he wasn't sure what touching it might mean. But he trusted her, and so he extended his hand and placed it on the cool surface of the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. But then Axel felt a strange warmth spreading from the stone into his fingertips, up his arm, and into his chest. The warmth was not uncomfortable, but it was overwhelming, filling him with a sense of connection to something larger than himself. It was as if the stone was alive, vibrating with energy that Axel couldn't comprehend. The woman stepped back, her eyes never leaving Axel as he stood there, hand pressed against the stone. The energy seemed to grow stronger, and Axel could feel his heartbeat quicken. The world around him seemed to blur, and for a brief moment it felt like time itself had stopped. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the warmth faded. Axel pulled his hand away from the stone, his heart still pounding in his chest. The woman was watching him closely, waiting for his reaction. Axel didn't know what to say. He didn't understand what had just happened, but he could feel the change in the air, the shift in something that he could not yet explain. The alien woman stepped forward, her face calm, but Axel could see the flicker of something like approval in her eyes. She tilted her head slightly, as though she were waiting for him to speak, but Axel had no words. He was still processing everything that had happened, still trying to make sense of the strange bond that was forming between them. After a moment, she turned and began to walk away, as if she had given him all the answers she could for now. Axel stood frozen in place, his mind racing. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt a sense of purpose, of destiny in his chest. This encounter wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Axel followed the giant alien woman through the desert as the shadows grew longer and the twin suns began to set. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the air was cooler now, though still heavy with the scent of sand and earth. They walked in silence, the sound of Axel's boots crunching on the sand the only noise between them. He still wasn't sure what had just happened at the stone structure. The warmth, the strange energy he felt from it, it was like nothing he had ever experienced. Part of him wanted to ask the woman what it meant, to demand some kind of explanation. But another part of him knew that she wouldn't give him one, not yet at least. There was something about her, something ancient and powerful, that made him realize that he might never fully understand the meaning of the encounter. And perhaps that was fine. The alien woman moved with a purpose, her long strides carrying her easily across the sand. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, and Axel couldn't help but feel like he was being led to something important. She didn't speak, didn't offer any guidance or explanation. But somehow, Axel felt more connected to this alien world, to her than he had ever felt before. It was as if, in that brief moment of contact with the stone, he had become part of something much larger than himself. They walked for hours, with the stars beginning to twinkle above them as night fully took hold. Axel was starting to feel the weight of the journey on his legs, the exhaustion from the long day beginning to catch up with him. But the alien woman seemed unaffected by the passage of time. She moved with an effortless grace, her focus unwavering, her destination clear. Eventually, they reached a cliffside where the woman stopped. She looked out over the vast desert below, her back to Axel, as if waiting for something. Axel stood several paces behind her, unsure of what to do. He wanted to speak, to ask her where they were going, but the words felt stuck in his throat. He had no idea how to communicate with her, no idea how to explain that he was both fascinated and confused. The woman turned to him, her violet eyes locking onto his. She didn't say anything, but there was an intensity in her gaze, a depth to her expression that Axel couldn't ignore. It was as if she was silently reading him, trying to understand his thoughts, his feelings. Axel stood still, feeling the weight of her gaze, but he didn't look away. There was something mesmerizing about her presence, something that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of discovery, on the brink of understanding. Finally, the woman spoke, her voice as deep and rich as before, but this time Axel could make out a few words. It wasn't in a language he recognized, but he felt the meaning of it in his chest. It wasn't the words themselves that mattered. It was the tone, the energy behind them. She was asking him something important. Axel took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He wasn't sure what she had said, but he knew he had to respond. He stepped closer to her cautiously, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance between them. He raised his hands, palms facing her, as if offering some kind of peace offering. "I don't understand," Axel said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "But I want to understand. I want to help." The woman watched him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned back to the cliffside and motioned for him to follow. Axel hesitated, unsure of what was happening, but then he nodded and followed her once again, this time with more urgency in his step. They descended the cliffside, the sand beneath their feet shifting with each movement. The woman moved effortlessly, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Axel, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, his legs aching from the long walk. His thoughts were a jumble, the questions racing through his mind faster than he could keep up with them. What was she trying to show him? What was the purpose of all of this? Finally, they reached the bottom of the cliff, and Axel was surprised to see a large, circular structure hidden among the rocks. It was ancient, built from stone that had weathered the sands of time. The structure was unlike anything Axel had seen before. It wasn't of human design, that was certain. There were carvings along the walls, intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story, though Axel couldn't make sense of them. The markings were unlike any language he had encountered, a series of symbols that seemed to shift and change when he tried to focus on them. The woman walked forward without hesitation, her massive form gliding through the entrance as if she had been here many times before. Axel hesitated, but only for a moment, before he followed her into the structure. The interior was dim, lit only by the faint glow of crystals embedded in the walls. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of ancient stone, and Axel could hear the faint hum of something, some kind of energy, perhaps, coming from deeper within. As they moved further inside, Axel's senses heightened. There was a strange feeling in the air, like the structure itself was alive, waiting for something. The walls seemed to pulse with an energy that he couldn't explain, and as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around nervously, but there was no one else in sight. It was just him and the giant woman, the two of them walking through this mysterious place together. They came to a large chamber at the heart of the structure, a room that was open and circular, with a massive stone pedestal at its center. The pedestal was covered in glowing symbols, and the floor around it was etched with more strange markings. The woman walked toward the pedestal, her eyes fixed on it as if she had been here many times before. She reached out with one hand, placing her fingers on the surface of the stone, and Axel felt the air around them shift. For the first time since they had met, Axel felt a deep sense of understanding. It wasn't something he could explain, but the feeling was undeniable. The pedestal, the glowing symbols, the strange energy in the air, it was all connected. It was as if the woman had brought him here for a reason, as if this moment, this place was meant to be. The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with something Axel couldn't name. She looked at him as though she were waiting for him to understand something, waiting for him to make a connection. But Axel didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to do. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, and for the first time he felt truly small in the face of something much larger than himself. And then, as if she sensed his uncertainty, the woman spoke again. This time the words were different, more familiar though still foreign, but Axel understood them somehow, felt their meaning deep within him. "You are part of this now," she said, her voice low and powerful. Axel's heart raced, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Part of this, what did that mean? Before he could ask, the woman stepped back from the pedestal and turned to face him fully. She reached out and placed one massive hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. Axel felt the power in her grip, the strength of her people, and for the first time he realized that he wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of something much larger, a force that had been waiting for him, for this moment, for this connection. And as the woman spoke, Axel realized that his journey had only just begun. Axel stood still, his mind racing as he felt the weight of the woman's touch. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, a bond that seemed to reach into the very core of his being. Her hand was massive, yet it rested gently on his shoulder, as if she were trying to offer reassurance. He could feel the strength in her, the power of a warrior race that had survived for centuries. And yet, despite her intimidating size and presence, there was something about her that made Axel feel safe, something that made him believe he wasn't alone in this strange world. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the chamber was the soft hum of the energy that filled the air, a constant pulse that seemed to resonate with Axel's very heartbeat. It was as if the structure itself was alive, waiting for something or someone. Axel felt the weight of history pressing down on him, the knowledge that he was standing in a place that held ancient secrets, secrets that might never be fully revealed. The woman's violet eyes never left Axel's face as she stepped back, her hand slowly withdrawing from his shoulder. Her gaze held a quiet intensity, as if she were assessing him, trying to understand who he was and what his presence meant in this place. Axel wasn't sure how to respond. He had no words, no answers to give her. He had no idea what was happening, what role he was meant to play in this strange encounter. But one thing was clear: he was no longer just an outsider. He was part of something larger than himself. The woman turned away from him, walking toward the center of the chamber where the glowing pedestal stood. She reached out with one long, graceful hand and placed it gently on the stone. The symbols on the pedestal began to glow brighter, and Axel felt a surge of energy in the air. It was almost as if the structure itself was reacting to her touch, responding to the presence of someone who belonged here. Axel's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her, his mind racing with questions. What was this place? What was its purpose? And why had she brought him here? The woman turned back to him, her eyes softening slightly as if she could sense his confusion. She gestured for him to come closer, and Axel hesitated only for a moment before walking toward her. As he approached, he could feel the energy in the room growing stronger, the air charged with a kind of anticipation that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. When he reached her side, the woman stepped aside, leaving the pedestal open for him to approach. Axel stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of the decision he was about to make. Everything in him screamed to take action, to touch the pedestal, to unlock whatever secret it held. But a small voice in the back of his mind warned him that he might not be ready, that there was something he was missing, something important. The woman's gaze rested on him, calm and steady, as if waiting for him to make up his mind. Axel took a deep breath and stepped forward, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out toward the pedestal. His fingers brushed against the surface, and the moment his skin made contact with the stone, a flood of energy rushed through him. It was like nothing he had ever felt before, stronger than any electrical current, warmer than the heat of the desert sun, yet strangely comforting. The energy surged through his body, filling him with a sense of clarity, as though his mind was being opened to something vast and ancient. For a brief moment, Axel felt as though he was floating, disconnected from the physical world around him. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of distant stars, of strange worlds and ancient civilizations, of battles fought long before humanity had ever looked to the stars. He saw images of beings like the woman before him, their powerful forms marching across deserts, fighting for survival for their way of life. The images shifted, and Axel saw the destruction of their worlds, the rise of new powers, the ebb and flow of time itself. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the flood of images stopped. Axel staggered back, his head spinning, his heart racing. He could still feel the energy coursing through him, though it was no longer overwhelming. It was as if something deep within him had been unlocked, as if he had just touched the surface of something vast and unknowable. The woman watched him carefully, her eyes studying him with a kind of quiet understanding. Axel looked at her, still trying to make sense of the visions he had just experienced. He had seen the history of her people, their struggles, their triumphs, and their losses. It was as if he had lived through centuries of their history in the span of a few seconds. The weight of it all pressed down on him, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility, though he didn't fully understand why. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He had so many questions, so many things he wanted to ask, but they all felt insignificant in the face of what he had just witnessed. The woman seemed to sense his confusion and stepped forward, her large hand resting lightly on his arm. She didn't speak, but her touch was comforting, as if she were telling him that it was okay, that he didn't need to have all the answers right now. Axel nodded slowly, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He was still reeling from the experience, but he knew that there was no turning back now. He had touched the pedestal, and whatever it had unlocked in him, he couldn't ignore it. There was a purpose here, something he was meant to do, and he was beginning to understand that his journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much larger. The woman led him away from the pedestal and toward a narrow passageway that had been hidden in the shadows. Axel followed her without hesitation, his mind still racing with the images of the past. The energy in the air was different now, more subtle but still present. It was as if the very walls of the structure were alive, breathing with the power of ancient knowledge. As they walked deeper into the structure, Axel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided toward something important, something that would change the course of his life forever. The woman seemed to know where she was going, her pace steady and sure, as if she had walked this path countless times before. Axel trusted her, though he didn't fully understand why. There was a connection between them now, something that went beyond words, beyond logic. It was a bond forged in the depths of this alien world, and Axel knew that he had a role to play in whatever was about to unfold. They came to a large, circular chamber at the heart of the structure. The walls were covered in more of the glowing symbols, and in the center of the room was a massive stone basin, filled with a strange liquid that shimmered in the dim light. The woman stood in front of the basin, her eyes focused on it as if waiting for something. Axel felt a shiver run down his spine, sensing that whatever was to come next would be the culmination of everything that had led him here. The woman turned to him, her eyes meeting his once more. She spoke in her deep voice, the words flowing with a rhythm that Axel still couldn't fully understand. But this time, there was no mistaking the meaning. It was a command, a request, a call for him to step forward and complete the task that had been set before him. Axel didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready. He stepped forward, the weight of his decision pressing on him, and he knew that whatever happened next, he would not be the same. This was his moment, his purpose, and he was about to discover just how deeply he was connected to the fate of this alien world. Axel stepped toward the stone basin, his heart pounding in his chest. The liquid inside it shimmered with a strange, iridescent glow that seemed to pulse with life, almost as if it were alive. The air in the chamber felt thick with energy, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He glanced at the woman who stood silently at the edge of the basin, her violet eyes fixed on him. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation. She was waiting for him to take the next step. Axel swallowed hard, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? What was this liquid? What did it mean? He had no answers, but somehow he knew that he couldn't turn back. He had come too far, seen too much, and now the path ahead was clear, even if it was shrouded in mystery. Without speaking, the woman gestured toward the basin, her large hand making a sweeping motion as if to say, "This is your moment." Axel took a deep breath, steadying himself, and stepped closer to the basin. The strange liquid inside seemed to call to him, its glow almost hypnotic. He didn't understand why, but he felt a deep connection to it, as if it were a part of him, a part of something far greater than himself. He knelt down beside the basin, his hands trembling as he reached out toward the liquid. The moment his fingers touched the surface, he felt a shock run through his body. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, a rush of energy that made his head spin. The liquid swirled beneath his fingers, reacting to his touch, and Axel gasped as a flood of images and sensations flooded his mind. It was as if the entire history of the alien race, the story of the woman and her people, was being imprinted onto his very soul. He saw worlds, alien worlds, far from Earth. He saw the Zavros, the woman's people in their prime, living in harmony with their planet. He saw their battles, their triumphs, and their defeats. The visions were overwhelming, so vivid and real that Axel felt as if he were living through them. He saw the destruction of their civilizations, the loss of everything they had fought for. And then he saw hope. Hope in the form of this very moment, this connection, this strange alliance between him and the woman before him. The visions slowed, and Axel found himself back in the present, still kneeling before the basin. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his mind, but the images remained, lingering at the edge of his consciousness. He could feel them, like a weight in his chest. It was as if the knowledge of an entire race had been passed on to him in an instant. The burden of their history, their survival, was now his responsibility. The woman stood beside him, her presence calm, her gaze steady. She said nothing, but Axel could feel her understanding. She knew what had just happened, knew what he had just experienced. And in that moment, Axel understood something fundamental. He wasn't just a traveler passing through this world. He was connected to it, to her people, in ways he hadn't yet grasped. The woman reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder again, the touch grounding him, bringing him back to reality. Axel looked up at her, his breath still coming in short gasps, and he saw something in her eyes, a quiet respect, perhaps even gratitude. She had chosen him for a reason, brought him here for a reason, and now the task before him was clear. Without a word, the woman turned and began walking toward the exit of the chamber. Axel stood slowly, his legs stiff from kneeling for so long, and followed her. The weight of the knowledge in his mind was heavy, but it was also empowering. He had a purpose now, something larger than himself, and he knew that he couldn't turn away from it. As they walked through the narrow passageways of the ancient structure, Axel felt a sense of urgency. It wasn't just the energy from the basin that was driving him. It was the responsibility he now carried. The Zavros needed help, and he had the power to give it. Whatever had happened between him and the woman, whatever bond had been forged, had made him part of their story, part of their fight for survival. They reached the entrance of the structure, where the desert stretched out before them once again. The twin suns were beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the sand. Axel squinted against the bright light, his mind still processing everything that had happened. The woman stopped just outside the entrance, turning to face him. Axel paused beside her, looking out across the vast desert. He had come here as an outsider, someone who didn't belong, but now he felt different. The landscape before him was no longer just a barren wasteland. It was a place filled with history, with life, with purpose. And he was a part of it now. The woman spoke, her voice low and resonant, though Axel still couldn't fully understand the words. But this time it didn't matter. He could hear the meaning behind them, the emotion in her tone. She wasn't just speaking to him, she was speaking to the world, to the people who would hear their story. Axel nodded, understanding that the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. He had a role to play, a mission to complete. He wasn't sure exactly what that mission was, but he knew that he couldn't walk away from it now. The woman turned and began walking away from the structure, her long strides carrying her easily across the sand. Axel followed her, his legs moving more easily now as he fell into step beside her. He glanced at her, noting the quiet determination in her movements. She had been through so much, her people had suffered so much, but she had never given up. And now, neither would he. They walked together, the vast desert stretching out before them, the sun rising higher in the sky. Axel didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a purpose now, a reason to keep going, and he would see it through no matter what. As they walked, the woman spoke once more, her words flowing with a rhythm that Axel couldn't understand but felt deep within him. It was a promise, a vow to the future, to the survival of her people. Axel couldn't help but feel that same vow stirring inside him. He had been brought here for a reason, and now he was a part of something much larger than himself. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Axel knew that his journey was far from over. It was only just beginning.